this property doesn't belong to you anymore. It is time for you to pack up and get out." Those were the words my own father spat as he stood barricading the entrance to my grandfather's penthouse. Dad was dressed in a sharp, brand-new suit, gripping a thick stack of legal documents to his chest. Right beside him, my mother wore a triumphant, wicked smirk, literally dangling a set of apartment keys from her fingers. And right behind them, 3 uniformed police officers and 2 smug attorneys, just waiting for the signal. I was standing across the street on the sidewalk, my heart slamming against my ribs like a sledgehammer. My grandfather, Jeff Cooper, a 75-year-old man who was supposedly just returning from a relaxing 3-month European getaway, was staring down the barrel of being evicted from the very home he had spent half his life working for. But Grandpa Jeff didn't panic. He didn't yell. Instead, a soft, chilling smile crept across his face. And the words that came out of his mouth next absolutely froze the blood in my veins. "I knew you were going to try this," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. And that is exactly why I never actually left New York. If you're listening to this story right now, do me a huge favor and smash that like button and let me know down in the comments how you would react in this exact situation. Because trust me, what unfolds next is going to absolutely blow your mind. My name is Emma Cooper. I'm 28 years old, and I work as an elementary school teacher out in Queens, New York. If you had walked up to me just 3 months ago and told me that my parents, the 2 people I thought I understood better than anyone else in the world, would actively conspire to scam my elderly grandfather out of his life savings, I would have called you crazy. I would have laughed in your face. But that was before the mask slipped and my entire reality shattered. Let me give you some background on my grandfather, Jeff Cooper. He is the very definition of a self-made man. He came to this country as an Irish immigrant kid with barely $200 to his name and the clothes on his back. Fast forward 50 years, and he was the proud owner of a massive logistics company pulling in tens of millions of dollars in revenue. His crown jewel was his Upper Manhattan penthouse, valued at a cool $8 million. Nestled on the 32nd floor, it had sweeping, breathtaking views of Central Park, 3 huge bedrooms, a private mahogany study, and more than enough room to proudly display his lifetime collection of rare books and priceless antiques. My parents, Richard and Linda Cooper, lived a very different life. They were entirely ordinary. Dad worked as a mid-level accountant, and Mom was an HR assistant. Together, they pulled in about $120,000 a year. It was enough to afford a comfortable, middle-class existence in New Jersey, a nice 2-story suburban home with a 30-year mortgage, a couple of reliable Toyota sedans, and a yearly summer trip down to Florida. Growing up, I genuinely thought we were a happy family. We weren't filthy rich like Grandpa, but we were warm, comfortable, and content. My parents never once begged Grandpa for cash, and he deeply respected them for that independence. Dad and Grandpa weren't incredibly close. They'd share small talk about the stock market over turkey at Thanksgiving and Christmas, but there was no bad blood. At least, not until this past February. Out of nowhere, Dad's company filed for bankruptcy. He was laid off instantly. 150 employees were terminated in a single day without a dime of severance and absolutely zero warning. Just a sterile corporate email sent out on a Friday afternoon. Within 2 months, surviving on just my mom's income, they started drowning. They couldn't make the $3,500 monthly mortgage payments. Eventually, the dreaded foreclosure notice arrived from the bank. They were on the brink of losing the house. And that was the exact moment I noticed a disturbing shift in my father. Whenever Grandpa Jeff's name was brought up, the usual distant respect in my dad's eyes vanished. It was replaced by something dark, hungry, and calculating. It honestly made me sick to my stomach. One chilly evening in March, my parents called me over for an urgent family meeting. When I walked through the door, they were sitting at the dining room table, huddled over a laptop and a massive pile of printed financial statements. "Have a seat, sweetie," Mom said, pulling out a chair. "We need your thoughts on something." Dad spun the laptop around to face me. The screen showed a massive Excel spreadsheet tracking their mortgage, student loans, property taxes, and utility bills. The bottom line was glaringly red: minus $4,200 a month. We are going to lose the house, Dad stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. The bank gave us 60 days. I had suspected things were bad, but seeing the brutal math laid out like that made my throat close up. But we've figured out a solution, Mom chimed in. Her tone was bizarrely upbeat, almost giddy. We're going to pack up and move in with Dad. Wait, with Grandpa Jeff? I asked, completely taken aback. Did he actually agree to that? I already ran it by him, Dad said, nodding quickly. He's actually thrilled about the idea. He told me he gets incredibly lonely rattling around that giant penthouse all by himself. Having family around will be good for him. Plus, he's 75 now. We can keep an eye on his health. Logically, it made sense. But something about my dad's delivery felt incredibly off. It sounded rehearsed. Scripted. I guess that's a good idea, I replied slowly. But does he really have the space? He's been living his own independent life for decades. Emma, it's a 3-bedroom penthouse, Mom interrupted, waving off my concern. There's plenty of room. And the best part? We will save an absolute fortune. No more mortgage, no property taxes. We'll just throw him some cash for the electricity and water. Dad leaned in, lowering his voice. And look, if we're there taking great care of him in his final years, who knows? Maybe he'll remember us generously in his will. A chill ran straight down my spine. In my entire 28 years of life, I had never, ever heard my father speak about Grandpa's inheritance. He had never coveted Jeff's property before. Dad, Grandpa is perfectly healthy, I said, trying to keep my hands from shaking. And it's his money. He can do whatever he wants with it. Of course, Dad backpedaled immediately. I'm just saying, doing the right thing usually pays off. He'll appreciate the care. I drove home that night with a terrible, heavy knot in my stomach. A month rolled by, and my parents officially moved into the Manhattan penthouse. Grandpa called me a few days later, sounding genuinely happy. Emma, you have to come over. The place is so lively now. It's wonderful. I drove into the city that weekend. Mom opened the front door with a massive, beaming smile I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Come on in. I'm baking your grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies. But the second I stepped out of the foyer, I froze. The space was unrecognizable. The warm, inviting beige walls that Grandpa adored had been painted a sterile, dark charcoal gray. His prized vintage oil painting of Dublin, a tribute to his roots, was totally gone, replaced by some cold, modern abstract canvas. Isn't it gorgeous? Mom asked, catching me staring. I picked it up at an art gallery out in Brooklyn. This dusty old place desperately needed to be dragged into the 21st century. Did Grandpa okay all this? I asked, bewildered. Oh, he told us to do whatever makes us feel at home, Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. He's old, Emma. He doesn't care about interior design anymore. I wandered into the living room and felt my jaw drop. The beautifully worn, classic brown leather sofa Grandpa bought back in 1995, the very first piece of furniture he ever bought for the penthouse, was gone. In its place sat a rigid, white Scandinavian sectional. Grandpa's massive oak bookshelves, which used to be packed with thick biographies and history tomes, were crammed into a dark corner to make room for a lit glass display case holding Mom's designer fashion magazines. Where exactly is Grandpa? I asked, the irritation bleeding into my voice. Oh, he's hiding away in his study, Mom said, letting out a sharp, slightly bitter laugh. He's in there all day. Honestly, I think he's just trying to avoid us. I walked down the hall and knocked on the heavy oak door of Grandpa's study, a cozy little room with a spectacular view of Central Park where he spent his days monitoring his stock portfolio. Come in, he called out. He was sitting behind his antique mahogany desk, staring blankly out the window. But the moment his eyes met mine, his entire face lit up. Emma, my favorite girl in the world. I went over and hugged him tight, instantly noticing that his frame felt a little bonier than usual. Are you holding up okay, Grandpa? I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little worn out from the commotion, he said. He glanced nervously at the closed door and dropped his voice to a whisper. I honestly didn't expect them to tear the place apart. I told them they could make a few tweaks so they wouldn't feel like guests, but... Grandpa, You need to tell them to stop if you hate it, I urged him. I know, he sighed, rubbing his temples. But they're going through a really dark time, Emma. Richard is my only boy. Linda is drowning in stress. I don't want to play the role of the tyrant father. I looked deep into his eyes. He wasn't scared of them, but he looked incredibly exhausted. I decided not to push it, hoping it was just a bumpy transition period. But 2 weeks later, the situation escalated from uncomfortable to criminal. My phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Grandpa. Emma, I need you to get over here right now. Are you hurt? What's going on? I asked, jumping out of bed. I am physically fine, but we need to talk. Now. Don't wake your parents. I practically flew to Manhattan, arriving at the Penthouse around 11:30 p.m. The apartment was pitch black. My parents were dead asleep. Grandpa quietly cracked the front door open, wearing his pajamas, his face dead serious. He led me straight into his study, closed the door, and pointed a shaky finger at his mahogany desk. Emma, I keep all of my most sensitive legal documents in that bottom right drawer. He pulled it open, revealing thick folders. My will, my living trust, the deed to this property. And I always keep this drawer locked with a key. Okay, I said, my heart starting to race. Today, I found out the lock was picked. Are you positive? I gasped. I am 100% positive, he said firmly. I have a paranoid old habit from my ruthless corporate days. I place a microscopic, nearly invisible piece of thread right over the seam of the drawer. If it opens, the thread falls. The thread was on the floor today. And someone's fingerprints, smudges that definitely aren't mine, are all over the plastic sleeves of my trust. Did you confront Dad? Not yet, he whispered, a deep, agonizing pain flashing in his eyes. I want to be absolutely sure before I drop that bomb. But Emma, I am terrified that my own son is scheming against me. What could he possibly be trying to do? I asked, my mind racing. I don't have the full picture. But lately, Richard has been casually interrogating me about my estate. He's been asking incredibly specific legal questions. How exactly the Penthouse title is held. Whether anyone else is listed as a co-signer. How my will is structured to bypass probate. It's not normal curiosity. I slumped into a leather armchair, my head spinning. Tell me what you need me to do. For now, I need a spy, he said quietly. Come over more often. Keep your eyes and ears wide open. Watch them. For the next 2 weeks, I was over at the Penthouse almost every other day. And it didn't take long to spot the red flags. One afternoon, I was walking past my parents' bedroom and heard Dad whispering fiercely into his cell phone. Right, but I need to know the exact legal hurdle for a title transfer. What if the primary owner is advanced in age? What if he's showing signs of being senile? Does the state require a judge's order for that? A few days later, Grandpa went out to buy groceries. I walked into the study and caught my mom red-handed, running Grandpa's financial files through a portable scanner. When I asked what on earth she was doing, she didn't miss a beat. Oh, your grandfather asked me to digitize his messy paperwork. When Grandpa got home, I asked him about it. He shook his head. I never asked her to touch my papers. I handle my own filing. But the smoking gun came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was grabbing a glass of water in the kitchen and spotted a torn piece of a yellow legal pad sitting on the marble counter. It was covered in my dad's messy handwriting. I read the bullet points. Contact real estate attorney. Power of attorney versus dementia clause. Forged signature risk level. Timeline, 3 months. I felt physically sick. I snapped a crystal clear photo of the note and texted it to Grandpa immediately. That night, Grandpa called me. Emma, I need you to keep this a secret from your parents. But I am going to disappear for a little while. A week later, we were all sitting around the dining table having dinner. Grandpa cleared his throat and made a grand announcement. I've decided to go visit my brother Patrick over in Ireland. He's been begging me to come back for years. After all the stress of my old age ailments acting up, I think a long vacation is exactly what the doctor ordered. My parents instantly locked eyes across the table. It was a micro-expression, but I caught the flash of pure adrenaline. Oh wow, Dad said, desperately trying to sound nonchalant. How long do you think you'll be gone? At least 2 or 3 months, Grandpa replied smoothly. I want to do the full European tour. Scotland, France, maybe Italy. I'm getting up there in years. I need to see the world while my legs still work. Do you want one of us to chaperone you? Mom offered, putting on a sickeningly sweet voice. You're 75, Jeff. Backpacking alone might be tough. I'll be just fine. Patrick is meeting me in Dublin, and my cell phone works internationally. We'll keep in touch. After dinner, I volunteered to wash the dishes. The moment the water started running, I crept down the hallway and pressed my ear against my parents' bedroom door. This is it. Mom was whispering, her voice vibrating with excitement. 3 months. That is more than enough time. Are you absolutely certain we can pull this off? Dad asked, sounding slightly panicked. What if we get caught? What is there to be afraid of? Mom hissed back. He will be literally on the other side of the planet. And he's 75. We just stick to the narrative. He has early onset dementia and lacks the mental capacity to manage his assets. We already bought that fake psychiatric evaluation. A fake psychiatric evaluation? Dad's voice spiked in panic. Where the hell did you buy that? Stop asking questions you don't want the answers to. Mom snapped. The real estate lawyer already guaranteed it. If we present medical evidence of cognitive decline and establish that we are his immediate family and primary caregivers, we can push through a conservatorship and force the title transfer. I backed away from the door, my whole body trembling. I locked myself in the guest bathroom, pulled out my phone, and frantically texted Grandpa, they are going to file for conservatorship using fake medical records. You have to run. His reply came back seconds later. I know, my brave girl. That is exactly why I'm leaving. I will call you soon. 2 days later, Dad practically shoved Grandpa into his car and drove him to JFK Airport. When Dad returned to the penthouse, he poured himself a glass of scotch and smiled. His plane took off. The clock starts now. We have 3 months. But there was one massive detail Dad was clueless about. Grandpa Jeff never got on that airplane. Instead, he hailed a cab from the terminal and drove straight back to Manhattan. He had secretly rented a small, discreet studio apartment just 10 blocks away from the penthouse. And he wasn't alone. Sitting in that studio with him was a man named Marcus Webb, a ruthless, highly experienced private investigator and former NYPD detective. Grandpa called me from his burner phone. Emma, the trap is set. Marcus and I are going to monitor their every move from this bunker. I need you to keep visiting the penthouse. I need you to play the loving daughter. Pretend you are totally oblivious to their schemes. Can you handle that? Yes, I whispered into the receiver, tears stinging my eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. For the next 90 days, I delivered an Oscar-worthy performance. I went over for Sunday dinners. I helped my mom chop vegetables. I laughed at my dad's jokes. I acted like we were a perfectly normal, happy family. But behind their backs, I was a ghost. Because New York is a one-party consent state, I legally recorded every single conversation we had on my phone. I photographed every piece of mail, every printed document, and every sticky note I could find in that house. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb was doing the heavy lifting out on the streets. He put a physical tail on both of my parents. He documented every location they visited and photographed every person they interacted with. When Dad had a secret meeting at a sleek midtown law firm with a shady real estate attorney named David Klein, Marcus was there. Marcus paid the receptionist $500 under the table to get a copy of the firm's visitor log. Dad had booked 3 consultations under the file name, Emergency Property Transfer, Elderly Parent. When Mom snuck off to an East Village coffee shop to meet a sketchy-looking guy, Marcus followed him. The guy turned out to be a document specialist, the criminal underworld's polite term for a master forger. Marcus actually set up a sting. He posed as a desperate client, wore a wire, and got the forger to openly brag on tape that he had just manufactured a fake medical history for a Mrs. Cooper. When my parents visited a local notary public named Cheryl Kim, Marcus paid her a visit the very next day. He flashed his old NYPD badge, bluffed that a grand jury was already investigating her, and terrified the woman into confessing. Trembling, the notary admitted that my parents had handed her $2,000 in cold, hard cash to notarize a deed transfer without Jeff being present. They had forged Grandpa's signature themselves. Marcus got her to sign a sworn affidavit agreeing to testify against them. Marcus even tracked down Linda's former HR coworker, Janet Reeves. Janet happily told Marcus that Mom used to constantly complain at the water cooler about wanting to claim her inheritance early by having Grandpa declared mentally unfit. Janet agreed to be a character witness. But the absolute nail in the coffin? Before Grandpa left for Ireland, Marcus had swept through the penthouse and installed state-of-the-art, microscopic, audio-equipped hidden cameras in the living room, kitchen, and study. For 3 months, those cameras silently recorded my parents' descent into pure villainy. The lenses captured crystal-clear footage of Dad and Mom laughing as they plotted the fraud. They recorded Mom inviting the criminal forger into Grandpa's own living room to practice tracing his signature. They recorded Dad pacing the study, talking on speakerphone with the dirty lawyer about how to legally bypass a judge's medical review. We had everything. We just needed them to pull the trigger. And in the 3rd month, they finally did. Armed with their fake psychiatric evaluation, their forged letter of intent, and their illegally notarized documents, my parents marched into the county clerk's office. They filed a formal deed transfer, claiming Grandpa had graciously gifted the $8 million penthouse to them out of gratitude for their caregiving during his mental decline. The county clerk stamped the paperwork. Legally, on paper, my parents were now the sole owners of the multi-million-dollar property. That afternoon, they sent a shockingly cold email to Grandpa's account. Dad, great news. Since you don't really need the space anymore, we've legally transferred the penthouse into our names. You can just relax and enjoy your retirement over in Ireland permanently. We will handle shipping your personal items. Do not try to return to the apartment. No apologies. No asking for permission. Just a ruthless eviction notice sent across the globe. Grandpa called me the second the email hit his inbox. Emma, he said, his voice like pure steel. It is time. I'm coming home. The day of reckoning fell on a bright, beautiful Saturday morning in early June. The weather in New York was absolutely perfect. My parents had been incredibly busy. They had hired a locksmith to drill out and replace every single lock on the penthouse doors. They had a moving crew on standby, ready to pack Grandpa's antiques into cardboard boxes. They had even drafted a predatory legal waiver, planning to force Grandpa to sign away his right to sue them. They invited me over to welcome Grandpa home before they kicked him to the curb. I stood in the foyer, my stomach doing backflips, my phone secretly recording audio in my jacket pocket. At exactly 10 a.m., Dad's phone buzzed. A text from Grandpa, "My taxi is arriving. I will be upstairs in 15 minutes. My parents looked at each other. Mom gave a sick, icy smile. Showtime. They marched out into the hallway and stood aggressively in front of the penthouse doors. Dad clutched his stack of fraudulent paperwork. Mom spun the new apartment keys around her finger. They looked like conquering kings ready to slaughter a peasant. At 11:10 a.m., the elevator chimed. The metal doors slid open. Grandpa stepped out. He looked immaculate. His hair was freshly trimmed, his posture was military straight, and his eyes were burning with a terrifying intensity one had never seen before. And he wasn't alone. Marcus Webb stepped out beside him, along with 2 other large, intimidating men in sharp suits. Grandpa walked slowly up to the door of his own home. He looked my parents up and down. "Richard." "Linda," he said, his voice eerily quiet. "May I please enter my own house?" Dad puffed out his chest and took a step forward to block the path. "This isn't your house anymore, Dad. This penthouse belongs to Linda and me now. Look at these documents." Dad shoved the paperwork toward Grandpa's face. "The deed transfer has been fully processed and recorded by the county clerk. It is 100% legal. You signed this property over to us before you flew to Ireland." "I signed it?" Grandpa asked, raising a single eyebrow. "Yes, you did." "That is your signature right there," Mom snapped, aggressively tapping the forged ink on the bottom line. Grandpa stared at the paper for a long, agonizing moment. Then, he let out a low, sad chuckle. "So, you two really think you've won?" "We have won," Dad said, his voice dripping with arrogance. You can go hire some hotshot lawyer to challenge it, but these documents are notarized and filed. You'll spend the next 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars in court, and you will still lose. Just accept it. And let's be honest, Jeff, you're 75, Mom added, faking a sympathetic pout. You need to be in an environment suited for your cognitive decline. We've already picked out a lovely assisted living facility for you. Standing behind them, I literally felt like I was going to throw up. These were the people who raised me. The people who taught me not to lie, not to steal. Grandpa shifted his gaze to me for a fraction of a second, winking imperceptibly before locking eyes with my dad. You know, Richard, Grandpa said slowly, his voice echoing in the marble hallway. I taught you a lot of life lessons growing up. I taught you the value of $1. I taught you about integrity. I taught you that hard work pays off. What's your point? Dad sneered. My point is, I realize now there is one vital lesson I forgot to teach you, Grandpa said, his eyes narrowing into slits. I forgot to teach you that if you are going to play a dirty game, you better make damn sure your opponent isn't playing dirtier. Grandpa took a step back and nodded at the private investigator. Marcus Webb stepped forward, popping the latches on his leather briefcase. He pulled out a binder of evidence that was 3 times thicker than Dad's pathetic stack of forged papers. Mr. Richard Cooper and Mrs. Linda Cooper, Marcus announced, his voice booming with absolute authority. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a licensed private investigator retained by Mr. Jeff Cooper. I am here to formally present irrefutable evidence of felony fraud, forgery, and attempted elder abuse. The blood instantly drained from my parents' faces. Marcus didn't pause. He started reading from his list like an executioner reading a sentence. Exhibit 1. High-definition video and audio surveillance recorded from inside this very penthouse over the last 90 days. Marcus held up a silver USB drive. This drive contains dozens of hours of footage of you both explicitly detailing your plot to forge Mr. Cooper's signature, practicing the forgery, and hiring a criminal element to manufacture medical documents. Mom's jaw dropped open. She started physically shaking. Exhibit 2. A sworn, signed confession from notary public Cheryl Kim, who admits on the record that you bribed her with $2,000 cash to illegally notarize a fraudulent deed. Exhibit 3. Audio recordings and a sworn confession from Tony Diaz, an underground document forger, who confirms you paid him $5,000 to fabricate a fake psychiatric evaluation and a fraudulent letter of intent. Exhibit 4. Bank records proving you withdrew exactly $7,000 in untraceable cash in the exact time frame those bribes were paid. Exhibit 5. Audio recordings of Richard Cooper consulting with attorney David Klein on how to illegally transfer an estate without the elderly owner's consent. Exhibit 6. Sworn testimony from your former colleague, Janet Reeves, confirming premeditated intent to defraud your father due to alleged dementia. With every single word Marcus spoke, my parents shrank. Dad looked like he had been struck by lightning. He was completely paralyzed. Mom let out a high-pitched whimper and covered her mouth. Both of you have violated a staggering number of New York state laws, Marcus concluded mercilessly. This includes forgery in the 2nd degree, which is a Class D felony, criminal impersonation, a Class A misdemeanor, and attempted grand larceny of property valued over $8 million, which constitutes grand larceny in the 1st degree, a Class B felony carrying mandatory prison time. Right on cue, the elevator dinged one more time. The metal doors opened, and 2 fully uniformed NYPD officers marched out, accompanied by a stone-faced female detective in a trench coat. NYPD, one of the officers announced, resting his hand on his utility belt. Mr. Cooper has officially filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney. We hold active warrants for the arrest of Richard Cooper and Linda Cooper. Total chaos erupted. Wait, no! Dad screamed, his arrogant facade completely shattering. He threw his forged papers on the floor and lunged toward Grandpa. Dad, please. This is a massive misunderstanding. I'm your son. You can't let them do this. You are my son, Grandpa replied. And for the very first time, his voice cracked with genuine, heartbreaking emotion. And that is exactly why this is destroying me. I gave you everything I had, Richard. I taught you everything I knew. And you repaid my lifetime of love by trying to steal my home and throw me into a psych ward like a piece of human garbage. Dad, you don't understand the pressure we were under. Mom shrieked, hysterically crying as the female detective grabbed her arm. We lost our house. We were desperate. We had no other options. You had a million options. Grandpa roared, his voice shaking the walls. If you were drowning, you could have come to me like adults and asked for help. I would have paid off your mortgage tomorrow. I always take care of my family. But you didn't ask. You chose to backstab me. You chose to forge my name. You chose to treat me like I was already dead. The male officer grabbed Dad's wrists and violently spun him around. Richard Cooper, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The metallic click-clack of handcuffs echoing in that pristine marble hallway is a sound I will never, ever forget. Doors up and down the hallway were cracking open. Wealthy Manhattan neighbors in their silk bathrobes were peering out, watching the spectacle. The building's doorman had come up and was standing by the elevator, completely speechless. As Dad was being frog-marched toward the elevator, he suddenly stopped and whipped his head around to stare at me. His eyes were burning with toxic, pure hatred. You knew about this the whole time, didn't you, Emma? He snarled. You helped him set us up. Tears were streaming hotly down my cheeks. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked my father dead in the eye. Yes, I did. What kind of monster are you? Dad screamed, fighting against the cops. You betrayed your own flesh and blood. No, I fired back, my voice trembling but laced with venom. I protected my grandfather, the man who actually loves me. You and Mom are the ones who betrayed this family. You betrayed everything you ever taught me. Dad didn't have a response to that. The officer shoved my screaming mother and my silent, furious father into the elevator. The doors slid shut. Silence instantly fell over the hallway. Grandpa just stood there, staring blankly at the metal elevator doors. His rigid posture completely collapsed, his shoulders sagging beneath the weight of what just happened. I walked over and wrapped my arms tightly around him. Are you going to be okay? I whispered. He didn't answer for a very long time. Finally, he kissed the top of my head. No, but eventually I will be. Behind us, one of the suited men, a professional locksmith Marcus had brought along, pulled out his drill and began tearing my parents' new locks out of the door. Grandpa was reclaiming his castle. The very first time my parents tried to contact me was 3 weeks after they posted bail while awaiting trial. It was a quiet Thursday evening. My phone started vibrating on my nightstand. The caller ID flashed, Mom. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the glowing screen. 5 rings. 10 rings. Finally, I hit the red reject button. 2 minutes later, a voicemail notification popped up. I clicked play. Emma, honey, it's Mom. Her voice was a ragged, wet whisper. I know you hate us right now. I know you don't want to hear my voice. But you have to understand the terror we were feeling. We had nothing left. I can't even sleep, sweetie. Every time I close my eyes, I see the look on your face in that hallway. Please, please just call me back. I'm begging you. Part of me, the little girl who had been loved and protected by this woman for 28 years, wanted to dial her number. I wanted her to give me some magical explanation that would make the nightmare go away. But there was no magical explanation. She was a criminal. I deleted the voicemail permanently and blocked her number. The second attempt came a few days later. An email from Dad, sent at 2:14 in the morning. Emma, I know you're furious. I accept that. But you need to hear the actual truth. We are not the cartoon villains you and Marcus made us out to be. We are just normal people who got pushed over the edge into total desperation. Do you have any idea what it does to a man to watch his savings account hit zero? To look at a foreclosure notice and know your wife is going to be sleeping on the street? I am 52 years old, Emma. Nobody is hiring a 52-year-old fired accountant. Your grandfather sits on an $8 million real estate empire. He lives in a palace he doesn't even use, while his own son was suffocating. How's that justice? I know what we did was illegal, but I didn't do it out of greed. I did it to survive. I did it to save our family. Jeff has his millions. He will be fine. But we have been destroyed. We are currently living in a microscopic apartment out in the Bronx. Your mother is working 2 minimum wage retail jobs just to buy groceries. I am 52 years old, and I am delivering fast food for DoorDash. I am begging you, can you find it in your heart to forgive us? Not because we earned it, but because we are your parents. Please don't abandon us in the dark. Dad, I read that email 3 times. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. It made me feel guilty, angry, heartbroken, and deeply exhausted. I screenshotted the email and sent it to Grandpa, asking him what I should do. Grandpa replied instantly, "Emma, you must do whatever brings your soul peace. If you need to yell at them, reply. If you need to ignore them, block them. Just remember this. Never, ever feel guilty about watching someone face the consequences of the choices they freely made." That night, I opened my laptop and typed my final reply to my father. "Dad, I read your email. I understand that you are terrified of losing your house. But I cannot and will not pretend that your desperation makes abusing an elderly man acceptable. You say you did this for family. But real family doesn't forge signatures. Real family doesn't hire criminals. Real family doesn't try to legally kidnap a 75-year-old man and lock him in a facility just to steal his apartment. Grandpa would have written you a check if you had just swallowed your pride and asked. You didn't want a lifeline. You wanted the whole ship. I need time. Maybe one day I will find a way to forgive you both. But right now, I cannot have you in my life. Do not contact me again." 6 months after the trial concluded, where they both pled out to lesser felony charges to avoid prison time, receiving heavy probation and crushing fines, my mom actually showed up at the elementary school where I teach. I was walking out of the main doors at 4 p.m. when I spotted her standing awkwardly by the flagpole. My breath hitched. She had aged 10 years in 6 months. She had lost a shocking amount of weight. Her hair was streaked with untended gray, and she was wearing a faded, threadbare sweater. But it was her eyes that caught me off guard. The arrogant, calculating smirk she had on eviction day was entirely gone. Her eyes were hollow, deeply sad, and filled with what looked like genuine remorse. "Emma," she whispered, stepping forward timidly. "Can you please just give me 5 minutes?" I looked around at my coworkers walking to their cars. I didn't want a screaming match in the parking lot. 10 minutes. In the cafeteria. We sat down on those tiny plastic elementary school chairs in the far corner of the empty lunchroom. Mom kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, unable to maintain eye contact. "I am so incredibly sorry," she began, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know words mean absolutely nothing right now, but I need you to look at me and know that I regret every single choice we made. The greed infected us. If I could rip out my own heart and go back in time to stop it, I would." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. I felt a pang of pity, but the wall around my heart remained up. "I need time, Mom," I said gently but firmly. "I am glad you are sorry. And maybe someday we can sit down and actually talk. But that day is not today. And it won't be anytime soon." Mom nodded slowly, furiously wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "I understand. I deserve that. I will wait as long as it takes." She stood up to leave, grabbing her purse. But before she walked away, she hesitated. "Emma, is Jeff doing okay?" The question genuinely surprised me. "He's fine. Can you please tell him that I am so sorry? I know he would slam the door in my face if I tried to go there. But I need him to know." That night, I sat in the penthouse living room and relayed the entire conversation to Grandpa. He stared silently out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the New York City skyline twinkle in the dark. "Linda actually apologized," he finally asked. "Yes. And honestly, Grandpa, I think she meant it." Grandpa slowly nodded, taking a sip of his tea. "Forgiveness is a very long, very painful process, Emma. I am glad she feels remorse. But I am not ready to forgive them. And honestly, I don't know if I ever will be. And that is perfectly fine," I told him. "An apology doesn't entitle them to a relationship." "So, what is your plan, kiddo?" he asked, looking over at me. My plan is to keep living my life surrounded by people who actually care about me. Like you. Richard and Linda can navigate the bed they made. I don't hate them anymore, but I'm keeping my boundaries heavily reinforced. 2 months after the dust settled, Grandpa officially moved out of his cramped studio bunker and back into the penthouse full-time. He spared no expense returning it to its former glory. He hired a painting crew to cover up the ugly gray walls with his favorite warm beige. He tracked down and purchased an identical vintage brown leather sofa. He rehung his beloved painting of Dublin right by the front door. Walking inside, it looked exactly like it did 3 years ago. Like my parents had never even existed. But Grandpa had definitely changed. The light in his eyes had dimmed a bit. He didn't laugh as loud. There were long stretches of time where he would just sit in his study, staring out at the park, entirely lost in his thoughts. I knew exactly who he was thinking about. It's impossible to completely erase your only child from your heart, no matter what they've done to you. One evening, as the golden hour sun was streaming through the penthouse windows, Grandpa called me into the study. "Emma," he said softly, folding his hands on his desk. "I met with my attorneys this morning. I have completely restructured my will." "Grandpa, we really don't need to talk about that right now," I said, feeling my throat tighten. "Yes, we do," he insisted. "I want you to know exactly what is going to happen. When I finally pass on, this penthouse, the business assets, and the vast majority of my financial estate are going directly to you." I started to protest, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish. I am also establishing a small, highly restricted trust fund for Richard. It will generate just enough monthly income to ensure that he and your mother never end up homeless or starving on the streets. But they will never be able to touch the principal, and they will never have enough to waste on luxury. I think that is the most fair way to handle my legacy." Tears immediately spilled over my eyelashes. "Grandpa, you don't have to give me anything. You stood by me when my own flesh and blood threw me to the wolves." "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my true family, and it is my job to make sure my family is taken care of." I walked around the desk and threw my arms around him. He felt so small and frail in my embrace, but to me, Jeff Cooper will always be the absolute strongest titan of a man I have ever known. "Thank you for trusting me," I cried into his shoulder. "Thank you for proving you were worthy of it," he whispered back. Years have passed since that horrible Saturday in the hallway. I still take the subway into Manhattan to visit Grandpa every single weekend. We cook elaborate meals together, we watch old classic movies, and we debate politics. At nearly 80 years old, his mind is still as razor-sharp as a tack. He still manages his own stock portfolio and stubbornly reads 3 physical newspapers every single morning. As for my parents, they've sent a few more emails and left a few more voicemails over the years. They continually apologize, try to explain their actions, and beg for a relationship. I still haven't responded. Maybe I will one day when I'm older. Or maybe I never will. I am still doing the hard work in therapy, trying to process the trauma that the 2 people who were supposed to protect me were capable of such calculated malice. But going through this nightmare taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Family is not defined by DNA. Blood does not automatically grant someone access to your life. True family is built on loyalty, mutual respect, and standing shoulder to shoulder when the world is burning down around you. Real family does not exploit your vulnerability for a payday. My grandfather didn't teach me that lesson by giving me a lecture. He taught me by standing up, fighting back, and refusing to be a victim. He taught me that while forgiveness is a beautiful concept, establishing ironclad boundaries is what actually keeps you safe. Sometimes, the people who love you the most aren't the ones who share your last name, but the ones who refuse to leave your side when everything falls apart. So, I turn the question over to you guys. If you were suddenly put in my exact shoes, what would you have done? Would you have risked everything to help your grandfather expose your own parents? Or would you have stayed out of it and let them steal the estate? Drop your honest opinions down in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of ultimate betrayal and justice kept you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable stories. Because at the end of the day, real life is always more dramatic than any movie.